Linux Luddites, episode 69, for the 11th of January, 2016. Hello and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we trial the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the old stuff better. I'm Joe.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Paddy. And after the news, today we'll be talking to Phelim Whiteley about running Android without Google Apps and Services. We'll catch up on your feedback over the last few weeks and be bringing you our tech and FOSS predictions for 2016. But before we get into the show proper, what have you guys been up to since last year?
Well, I went back, and I know this is going to sound incredibly sort of sheepish and defeatist, but I went back and looked at my prediction list, and obviously I made a whole bunch of different predictions and then whittled them down to the ones I thought were most likely, and they're the ones that aired on the show. And I made two other predictions, or at least noted them down, one of which was that another major Linux player will release a tablet version, and hello, the selfish tablet, which happened. And Docker will see a major competitor, possibly requiring the initiation of a standard. And this year in June, Docker and a whole load of other users of that got together and produced their standards. And so I'm just gutted that my ability to choose my own predictions is absolutely appalling, given how badly I did on the prediction show last time.
You're getting excuses in early for later on in the show.
Yeah, because I've had to do the same this year, obviously, whittle them down to the ones that I think are most likely. And we can't have like 20 predictions each. So this is me getting my excuses in.
So did anyone get anything exciting for Christmas then?
I got two kind of tech toys, one of which is both of them I'm really happy with. One was the Chromecast Audio, and I've actually straight away bought two more because they're perfect, and the promise of being able to do multi-room in it was actually brought to fruition sometimes in December, because they came out before that and you could only cast to one at a time, but they improved the application and you can now cast to all of them at once. So without having to get new speakers or anything, I've plugged one into my big lounge hi-fi, one in the kitchen and one in my bedroom, and it means that I can just have podcasts all over the house as I walk around, doing this the other, or cleaning or tidying, or music everywhere. So I'm a happy little camper that I get full, like, I've only got a flat, so it's not difficult to get to every room, but full audio in all the rooms. It's wicked. And the other one is the YubiKey. So that was my sort of main present, was the YubiKey Nano, and it allows you to do both USB, so it has one-time passwords for various, two-factor authentication and things. So if you go into LastPass, which is what my main use for it is, you'll put your password into LastPass, plug the little YubiKey in, and it's got a little tiny kind of bronze circle on it. It's a really, really small device. It's got a little tiny bronze circle on it, and it lights up in green when it's been recognised, which only takes a couple of seconds. You just touch your finger on the metal plate, and it automatically puts in the passcode, and in it goes. And it's absolutely seamless. It feels like magic. It's brilliant. But also the Nano has NFC, so you can use it on your phone as well. And that means that, again, on LastPass, for example, type my password into my phone, and it says, right, please present the Nano. And you just hold it up against the back. You get that common NFC kind of noise, and it recognises the one-time passcode, and in it goes. So it means that I can get two-factor authentication with not just with text messages, but now I've moved over to hardware two-factor, and it just gives you that sort of sense of security of having to physically have that thing, which I now keep on my keys. I seem to have given the game away, but anyway. So I've now got two-factor using that, which is also really good.
Well, I couldn't think of anything to get. What do you get the person who's got everything? And so all I could really think of was a slightly better version of my existing phone. So I bought a 64 gig version of my OnePlus One that's a little bit battered. Well, not battered, but a little bit scratched and not in perfect condition like mine was, and sold my one on. So for a little bit more money, not that much, the difference, I've now got a 64 gig 1+1, which means I can do things like install Debian, the Chroot Debian thing, which was quite cool. And it just means that I don't have to constantly worry about deleting stuff. So very, very boring Christmas present for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, likewise for me, I guess. I've been curling up of an evening with the Donovan and Kernighan book on Go, because I've been meaning to learn that for quite a long time. So that's how I've been entertaining myself and whiling away the dark nights.
And are you now proficient in the Go programming language?
Not as of yet. I think I'll have some commentary on it going forwards. I mean, there's some interesting things to do with arrays and slightly strange way it handles those. But for now, should we just get on with the news?
Yeah, let's do it. First up then, the long-awaited 1.0 release of Solus OS. Or is it just called Solus? I don't know. What's it called this week? So this is from Ike Doherty. We talked to him what feels like a long time ago when he was still in the process of developing this. And it was supposed to come out, according to Softpedia, last year, but then it didn't happen and there were various stumbling blocks, but it has finally arrived. And so now there is a standalone distribution with the Budgie desktop. And I understand you guys also had a bit of trouble getting it installed like I did.
Yeah, I spun up in VirtualBox, and it's one of those distros where you do the installation and then the configuration on the first boot. So it installed fine, but wouldn't progress further than the password screen on the first boot when you're actually trying to set up a user. I also tried to spin it up on my main laptop, which is a ThinkPad, and it failed to boot. And I saw Ike put a post up on Google Plus saying this will happen on derpy, quotes, hardware. I'm sorry, ThinkPads aren't derpy hardware. I mean, they're the most common and popular devices probably amongst the technical community out there, and we're going to come back to talk about ThinkPads later in the news. So I'm sorry, I count that as a big fail, really.
Well, I had a similar experience to Paddy, at least on hardware. I didn't try it in VirtualBox. That trying to get it booted up, I hit this issue where it wouldn't mount the USB drive properly. So I had to follow Ike's blog post, and then it worked. I got it installed, and I had installed the release candidate, and it's not hugely different. I know they've rewritten Budgie quite significantly, and now the panel's at the top rather than the bottom. And it took me a while. I actually had to ask on IRC how to change it and put it at the bottom, but that was user error, I think. But once I got it all set up, I don't know. I mean, it's just another distribution, isn't it? And it got me thinking, we've got LXDE, XFCE, Mate, Cinnamon, KDE versions 3, 4, and 5. Do we really need another standard looking desktop environment? And I don't mean to discredit all the hard work that's gone into Budgie and indeed Solus, but with all of the other options available, why do we need it? I mean, it's not like Unity, which, although I don't like it, it is at least doing something different. If you're going to put the effort into making something new, make it different somehow.
But I suppose this one has been built from the ground up using very current technologies and libraries and things like this, whereas older ones, LXDE and XFCE, will have a lot of craft and things in the background. And perhaps you just need a reset now and then to say, right, these are all the modern ways of doing things, and this is the way in which we should integrate sort of notifications and emails and things like this. So perhaps it will be better in the future when it makes the most of these newer technologies. But I agree, on the surface of things, it is very similar to XFCE, but sort of slicker and nicer looking, but that's because of user preferences and the way that they've laid it out. But we're not on a full review here. This is just the news that it's come out, and he's spent some time making sure that it has accessibility, so it comes with high contrast theming out of the box. And it's got Raven, which I hadn't heard about before, which is another newly written piece of software, which is an applet on the right-hand side for notifications and things like this. And then it has a package manager called EOPKG, which I think I used in the review, but I haven't really thrashed on. So maybe we need to have another fuller look.
Yeah, well, I wish it the best, and I hope that it continues to be developed and people test it and they iron out some of these initial problems. But I'm not going to be using it full-time anytime soon, I don't think.
So sticking with new releases, Darktable 2.0 has been released, and this is the raw image editing software that I discussed when I was going through the Riley photographic review a couple of shows ago. Some of the big announcements for this: it's moved to GTK 3, it has a support for a lot of new digital cameras, and with that it's got support for new white balance presets and new noise profiles for a whole range of digital cameras which have come out since Darktable 1.6. And it has sort of a print mode and a PDF export. So in the Darktable, you've got sort of Lightroom where you can look at all of your pictures. Then you've got Darktable where you do all your editing. And then had a couple of other views, one of which is for tethering your camera to the PC, which isn't really something I need to use it very much for. But if you're doing sort of shoots of people and things and you want to see the photo on a big screen straight away, that's how you can do that sort of thing. And this print view is another view that they've added on, so you can have a look at what your picture will be like before you print out, sort of thing.
Now, not being a photographer, I haven't tried this out. I hadn't even heard really of Darktable until you discussed it in that review. But it sounds to me like it is kind of professional grade software. It sounds like the sort of blender of the photography world, in that it is free software, but it is a serious competitor to, is it Lightroom, the Adobe one?
Yeah, and I think they do get compared on the same page. I mean, you say it sounds professional. Riley, who wrote and did the videos for the photography course I did, is a professional photographer, and he does use Darktable as his only editing suite. So yes, it is at the professional standard. I can't compare it between an Adobe rival. I'm not quite sure, what the similarities and disparities are. But I did try and install it, and unfortunately try is the important word in that sentence. After sort of messing around with the CMake and trying to get all the various dependencies that it needed, it claimed that I wasn't on GTK 3, even though my mint box is on 3.10, so I'm not quite sure what it's complaining at, and I'm basically going to wait for probably a deb package or a PPA to come out rather than doing it off of the GitHub.
Well, also over the Christmas period, Perl 6 appeared on the scene. Well, it's not strictly true to say that it appeared on the scene over Christmas, because it's been 20-odd years since the release of Perl 5. The final specification for Perl 6 was officially launched at Christmas, and it's been in design since about 2000, and the goal was never to provide full compatibility with Perl 5, although compatibility mode exists, but really to fix various ugly things with the language. I think it's probably important to bear in mind that in the Perl world, there's a difference between the language specification itself and any specific implementation of it. And what we're talking about here really is the language spec and the tens of thousands of test cases that tools can prove themselves against. And that's what's been frozen. And the default Rakudu compiler now passes all of those tests. I do wonder, though, guys, how relevant Perl is these days. I mean, it's still quite widely used, and there's a huge mass, or should I say mess, of legacy Perl code out there. But Python does seem to have largely eclipsed it for modern development, don't you think?
Well, that seems to be the impression that I get. I don't hear about Perl much at all, whereas Python seems to be very popular. It's certainly the way a lot of people get into programming, especially on things like the Raspberry Pi.
I think I'm quite biased in this because my brother and my dad both program solely in Python, so I get a lot of Python in the ear, and all I ever hear from Perl is, on forums and things, run this Perl script, run that Perl script, and the bashing that it gets for being very difficult to read and get through the way in which you can write it, whereas I'm slightly familiar with Python, and it's very rigorous in its formatting and the way in which you lay things out. So maybe it's a bit more clear to read, and maybe that's why it's become popular, because it is having lots of hard and fast rules means that once you've learnt those rules, you can exploit it more easily. Whereas if there's a bit of fuzziness, it might be a bit more difficult to really get into. And like you say, Joe, with the Raspberry Pi, a lot of people have got into that side of programming from that standpoint.
From the relatively good news about Perl 6 to the extremely dark and depressing news about Ian Murdoch. Ian Murdoch, of course, founded the Debian project. He is the Ian in Debian. And unfortunately, over the Christmas period, he died, aged 42. Now, I became aware that there was something strange going on a day or so before he died, based on his Twitter feed, which was very strange, and no one really knew whether it'd been hacked or whether it really was him tweeting that. And he had talked on his Twitter feed about the fact that he was going to commit suicide. And then the news came out a couple of days later that he had in fact died. But it seems that no one really knows exactly what happened. So I've heard a lot of speculation, and I don't really want to get into that myself.
Yeah, there's some sort of stories and things about the police getting involved and having to come out and arrest him from shouting and ranting at neighbours' houses and things. So it is a bit of a murky area, and quite what was going through his mind, or quite what actually happened. I don't think we've got the full tales. There's not really our place to speculate on things, but I think we can all agree that his work in the open source community and his legacy with Debian is absolutely huge. And writing the Debian manifesto to be, absolutely free in the true sense of the word, then it's shown how popular that thought was, given how prevalent Debian is and how many distributions are based on it. So yeah, it'd be a great loss. Well, staying in Obituary Corner, Richard Sapper, who was the Chief Industrial Design Consultant for IBM, died on New Year's Eve, age 83. He was a German-born, Italian-based designer, and is probably best known in the technology world for the ThinkPad range of IBM laptops. And I'm sure we can all picture that sort of quite industrial, kind of utilitarian style with the nipple, of course. And having looked through some of the other things he's designed, he's got monitor arms, again, in the technology world, but also all sorts of things, knife blocks and salt and pepper grinders, which seems to be the requirement for any kind of well-known designer, coffee makers and things like this. And his last design was the Carbon X1, which is a very, very sleek laptop.
Yeah, but he seemed to be one of those guys who put function before form in some regards. I mean, a lot of modern designers put form before function, or form even at the expense of functionality. And as I'm sat here recording this, looking at an X200 ThinkPad, I mean, you can't say it's an attractive thing, but it's a damn good laptop, and it's solid. It's probably going to be running for another 5 or 10 years. It's functional. It is robust. It's the things that you want, and it's the things you don't get out of much modern design.
Well, he also designed the Tizio, the Artemidi Tizio lamp, sort of desk lamp, which was the iconic kind of 80s looking desk lamp. You'd probably have to see a picture of it, but you would instantly recognize it. And that was a perfect example of function creating form, because that, as far as I know, was the first low voltage desk light. So it used a halogen light bulb, but it was 12 volts. And it was so new that the light bulb for it is actually the car headlight of an Alfa Romeo, I think. And the way he designed it was to use the frame rather than cables to carry the current. And because it was 12 volt, there was no risk of death for that. So just the paint on it was enough to insulate it. And it was absolutely ingenious. And I don't know, it's not that relevant to this show really, but I think that it illustrates that wider point that you were making, Paddy, that he did innovate, but not for its own sake. It was to make things better, because a low voltage light is actually better than a mains voltage one, because you get more light versus heat because of, physics, basically. So I'm really glad that you've put this in the news, Paddy, because Richard Sapper is definitely worth remembering, not only for the great work with the ThinkPad, but for most of the stuff that he designed.
Hear, hear. Well, moving on then, let's talk about Android a little bit. And Google is moving to OpenJDK, which is an open source implementation of the Java platform for future Android versions. And until now, they've used a Java class library derived from the Apache Harmony project. And Harmony was developed 10 years ago by the Apache Software Foundation as a free implementation of Java. But development on Harmony outside of Google largely ended in 2011, I think, after Oracle bought Sun. There's been quite a lot of fuss in the press about this one, and the first article we'll link to was written by ex-CTO of Mozilla, Andreas Gall, and Andreas seems to think this move spells doom and gloom for Google, and will end up with them ceding control over the Android software stack to Oracle. But does it? I mean, Andreas doesn't really seem to properly understand the licensing implications of the move, and I think a far more informative piece has been written by Brad Kuhn from the Software Freedom Law Centre. Now, as usual with anything from Kuhn, you have to wade past the self-aggrandising comments to get to the meat. But when you do, I think on this occasion, he's absolutely spot on. There really isn't that much to see here from a licensing perspective.
He makes the point that the move is purely technical, just to make the code better. Because although OpenJDK is GPL'd, it's got this class path exception, which makes it pretty permissive. So it's ultimately not much different licensing-wise to what they've been using previously. So the whole thing is really just sort of clickbaity FUD, isn't it?
I mean, they're basically moving what all of the applications run on, the code they'll run on, to, while a very similar code, actually different. So they're going to have to do some serious sort of background work to make sure that everything runs as smoothly as it currently does in order to jump from one to the other.
What, so just staying with one reboot a week?
But I mean, that is a hurdle to get over, and that hurdle must be smaller than the current hurdle of, as you say, maintaining this Harmony implementation. Is that the way it's working?
Yeah, that's how I see it, to be honest. And I guess a slightly larger point is how much of this move's been influenced by Google's ongoing legal dispute with Oracle over the Java API. But I've really seen very scant factual reporting on that as opposed to vague speculation.
But what about the point that this is going to delay the next Android release? I mean, it seems that if you're making huge changes under the hood like this, there is the potential for that to happen.
Well, I guess that's a possibility, but would it really matter? I mean, what advantages are you expecting to see in the next Android release?
Well, for me, it's mostly about security fixes, which hopefully will be in the older versions anyway. So not many, really. Now they've sorted the permissions out in Marshmallow. I can't really see anything apart from a complete rewrite that makes it a lot more stable and doesn't need to be rebooted every week. So I suppose if this change does make it more stable, which I doubt it will, but you never know, if that does take longer than anticipated, then I suppose the wait will be worth it.
Well, no doubt some of our listeners will have some points to make on this, so we'll get to that in maybe next fortnight's feedback. And there'll probably be some feedback about this next FSF story as well. Yeah,
the FSF Vision Survey, the FSF and free software. So there's a whole bunch of questions that they're asking you to answer. And some of them are those standard questions with the standard answers of the strongly disagree through to strongly agree. And some of them are pretty funny. FSF representatives are positive figures in the free software movement. Strongly disagree. But there's one question that seems to be missing. When the FSF goes on about proprietary software restricting your freedom, they're being hypocritical. I can't see that one, but that I would probably strongly agree with. Yeah, it's Joe at linuxluddites.com, just if you really want to troll me back. But, well, we'll have to see what people say to them and whether or not they publish it.
Yeah, it's a fairly short survey, and they're taking submissions until February the 1st, so you've got a couple of weeks to let them know your views, and I'll be interested to see what the results are, to be honest.
Yeah, props to John Stone, who pointed this out on our Google Plus page. And not only is it things about whether you agree with what the FSF are doing historically, but it's also where should they be focusing in the next 5 years to try and see what people's view of the FSF and free software is and where they should be directing themselves. So there's also some free form boxes to get your views across to them. So yeah, I recommend if you've got some things you want to say to the FSF or want to influence them, or at least show influence, then get over to the survey with the link in our show notes. Now, moving on to our next item, if you have a 8 gig memory stick that you feel like throwing in the bin or drilling a hole in, you could do that, which I would recommend. Or you could load it with Remix OS for PC, and then you could run Remix OS on your normal PC and even install it alongside a perfectly good, usable PC to see what other options are available to you.
I take it your opinion hasn't changed since we looked at the Remix Mini then?
No, my opinion hasn't changed. So it's coming out in mid-January, and I'm not sure I'm going to go to the effort of seeing if it has changed. I'll wait for yours two's opinion on that. But it's coming out, and if you want to have the Android x86 implementation, which has been boosted up by Remix to produce their own operating system, you can have a look at that without having to go and buy a Remix Mini.
And just to remind everyone, this is a proprietary operating system we're talking about, albeit built on top of Android.
Yeah, but it says, forget cost down, introducing cost free. So at least don't have to pay for it. But yeah, that's a bit strange that they're going to be giving this away, because they were talking about licensing it out for other hardware before, whereas now they seem to have gone back on that. So essentially what it sounds like they're going to do is put their custom launcher on top of Android x86. So the development for it will probably be relatively straightforward compared with the initial development of the custom launcher in the first place.
It's certainly got a lot of traction in the press that I saw. And we were going to talk about a story to do with console OS and x86 and the disagreements there. But there clearly is a demand, or a perceived demand at least, for Android on the desktop.
Is there a demand, or is it because it can be done and people go, oh, I use Android on my phone. Wouldn't it be useful if I can have it? Look, it's there already on a plate. I could just put it on my PC. Because I didn't see any great benefit of, even had it worked perfectly, I didn't see the massive benefit of having it on the PC, really.
I think you might be right, Jesse, because I've got a touchscreen laptop, my VivoBook. It's got a fairly small SSD in it, and I had a small Android partition on it for most of its life so far. But then I decided, I keep running out of space on my proper Linux partition, so maybe I should just delete the Android one. I never use it, and I haven't regretted it at all, to be honest. The only time I ever booted into it was to show people, hey, look, Android on a laptop. And, oh, look, it's cool touchscreen and everything, like when I showed you, Jesse, and Paddy. So, I don't know, maybe if it has got a proper desktop-like interface, it has got some potential traction. But again, it boils down to the applications are not designed to be run on a desktop. They're not designed to be windowed. And the same thing with those Samsung phones that you could have kind of split-screen, semi-windowed view of things. It's not designed for that. And you've got this vicious circle that there was no decent implementation of a desktop on Android, and therefore the applications wouldn't be developed for that. And maybe that can be broken if there's a really, really good implementation of it. And I disagree somewhat with you, Jesse. I don't think Remix OS is terrible. I think it's the applications that run on it didn't work well. So maybe once there is Remix OS for x86 laptops, it will mean that people will be more likely to develop Android apps that will work well with that. So I don't share your skepticism, I think, is the bottom line.
Okay. I mean, rarely do I boot up a PC and think, oh, this is nice. I love looking at desktop environments and just sort of clicking on menus and not actually using any applications for anything. But no, in the real world, applications are king and you need them to work. And I don't think it's going to have a big enough draw for people to specifically implement Android applications to run on the PC. But if Google do something to move Android over to the PC, that is when people are going to start writing apps. And then maybe Remix will have an ability to sort of jump on the back of that and implement better applications in Remix OS. For now, we're just going to have to agree to disagree, I think.
Right, well, let me come between the two of you. We'll carry on talking about Android for a minute, and the Lenovo Link, which is a 32GB flash drive that's going to retail for $39, which sounds really expensive, but it's got quite a neat trick up its sleeve. And we've talked about Visor on the show before, which is a Chrome app from famed developer Koosh that provides screen mirroring. I always found it somewhat sluggish and flaky. The Lenovo Link is going to provide the same facilities, and hopefully in a more stable and performant way. I mean, the device itself is a little USB stick that you plug into your phone and into your computer, and it mirrors the screen and also will take mouse movements across the two devices, so you can actually control and use your phone from your computer screen.
The question I have is, why would you want to do that? As cool as it is to see it, and I'd love to play with it, play is the key word there. I can't see any real use for it.
I think play is half of the equation. If you extend that to being plug and play, that's where I can see this really taking off, because if it does truly work in a plug and play manner, a lot of people will want it. I mean, we're not going to have properly converged devices for a while. I'm going to come back to convergence in my predictions later on in the show. But the ability to send text messages and what have you just from your computer screen for people running Windows, for instance, those of us who have got KD Connect or whatever installed can do that already, but a lot of the world can't. And I can see this just being a really useful way for people just to plug in their phone when they get to the desk at work and have access to those facilities in a very simple manner.
I'm not convinced. I think that most IT departments would block this immediately because companies don't want the lack of productivity that this will inevitably cause when they end up looking at Facebook on their phone, on their computer. I don't know, I'm just not convinced by it. It's one of those things where it's like, let's see if we can do it. And it's just a case of, we can do it, so let's do it. And it doesn't really have any great value as far as I can see.
Yeah, I think it's pretty magic. It's clever how you can go from having the pointer on the main screen and you just move it off to the left like there's a second screen on your phone and have the pointer on your phone. It sort of seems a bit creepy. And I think you're right, but also incorrect, Joe. So you're right that big companies won't like it, but not because of the lack of productivity. I mean, you can get on Facebook and Twitter and things on your PC at work as it is, and you can use your phone at your desk as it is. You're as unproductive as you're going to be if you're being unproductive and you want to do that. I think the problem is going to be, myself certainly, I can't plug my home USB stick into my PC and have it recognized. I can't plug my phone into my PC and have it recognized. I can't even use an adapter for an SD card, which isn't authorized and given to me by work. The USB pens have to be given to me by work, and I don't know how anyone connects their phone. I don't think they do. It's the locking down of the USB and ways in which viruses can get onto their system which are going to prevent this from actually being something. Now, obviously, that said, I can get a USB stick if work give it to me, and if work gives me this Lenovo Link, then maybe it had been, authorized and permissed in a way that allowed it to be used. But I think it's going to be the case of, I can't plug my phone in now, so why would I be allowed to plug my phone in just because it's going through this Lenovo Link jobby?
Well, I'm going to keep an eye on this because I'm fairly enthusiastic about the whole idea, and I can see it being a big success as long as it actually does deliver on the promises it's making at the moment.
Well, something I'm not enthusiastic about at all is the new Cyanogen OS 12.1.1 update. I'm so glad that I got rid of Cyanogen OS and went for Cyanogen Mod on my OnePlus One, because now they have implemented Microsoft things in Cyanogen OS. Things like Cortana, which is Microsoft's version of Siri or OK Google. Now, they announced last year in April that they were going to have a strategic partnership with Microsoft. That's Cyanogen Inc. And at the time, I'm sure I must have said negative things about it, and I'm going to say very negative things about it now. I understand that Cyanogen as a company needs to try and make some money, but I just don't think that this is the way to do it. Why are they doing business deals with Microsoft, a company who have consistently failed in the mobile space? Well, it's quite clear why they've done it. I can answer my own question, because Microsoft are going to give them a load of money because Cyanogen have proved, at least with tinkerers and hackers, that they can be massively popular in the mobile space. So they're trying to go mainstream, and Microsoft's kind of trying to jump on board with Android without having to kind of admit that they are doing that because it's not official Google Android. But it's like something that's popular with a certain crowd and then goes in a different direction to try and chase a much bigger crowd. And then the original audience just totally loses faith in it, because I'm not interested in a proprietary version of Cyanogen Mod or Cyanogen OS now with a load of Microsoft stuff in it. Who would be interested in that? No one. Tinkerers aren't going to be interested, and mainstream consumers aren't going to be interested, because who cares about Microsoft stuff? Who cares about Cortana? It's just naff and just not at all what people are interested in, surely.
Yeah, you have to bear in mind, though, that Microsoft currently rakes in an awful lot from claimed patents on Android from phone manufacturers. So I could see potentially handset manufacturers in various parts of the world perhaps adopting Cyanogen OS and being able to put out devices that are more competitive ones that have got stock Android on because of that.
That's a good point. And I suppose the kind of glimmer of hope here is that you can uninstall Cortana. It's not one of those system apps that you can only uninstall the updates to, which is really infuriating before you get into routing and Titanium backup and stuff. So there is that, and as long as they keep it so that you can get rid of that, I suppose it's not too bad. But it's just not at all something I'm going to be buying.
So just so that I'm clear, Joe, because you seem to know about the differences between these. Cyanogen Mod, where's the relation between that and Cyanogen OS?
Well, Cyanogen Mod is a totally open source version of Android based on the Android open source project code and ported to various phones. I say asterisk because the drivers have to be proprietary blobs, basically, to run the hardware. But all the rest of the code for the operating system is open source. Whereas Cyanogen OS is based on Cyanogen Mod, but with some proprietary goodness built into it. It is a commercial product that was originally on the OnePlus One. That got removed and replaced by Oxygen OS because of a dispute they had with OnePlus. But now it's coming on a few other phones, and it's going to be coming with this Microsoft stuff. So it's basically, the difference is one is totally open source apart from the drivers, and the other one is not open source at all.
Which I guess should put people's minds at rest that this Microsoft goodness is not going to find its way into standard Cyanogen Mod.
Well, that was my fear, that this Microsoft stuff would pollute Cyanogen Mod, but I really hope that you're right, Paddy. I seriously hope that.
Our next news story stays on the phone OS link only through Firefox OS, the recently stopped or deceased operating system. So this is Firefox OS, which can be run on an Internet of Things single board computer. So FFOS, IoT, SBC, for all those people who love their acronyms. It's been designed by MozillaFactory.org, who's a sort of subsection of Mozilla over in Japan. And it's basically a way in which you can run a Internet of Things device, or at least develop for it, upon the Firefox OS platform. And it has every connector you can possibly imagine, from I2C, SPI, standard GPIOs, microSD, UART, which I hadn't heard of, but universal asynchronous receiver transceiver, all sorts of connectors. And it just allows you to sort of trial and design Internet of Things based on Firefox OS, which was a fully web browser implementation operating system.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking about Firefox OS dying, we mentioned that it was going to live on in a few different guises. I mean, I noticed Panasonic brought out another Firefox OS-powered TV at CES recently. But you've got to wonder how much developers are really going to want to be invested in this as an operating system when it could just disappear at any time.
I saw a very interesting tweet, or possibly a Google Plus post about this. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was saying something like, Mozilla waited until Apple and Google had totally cornered the market, and then they brought out a phone. And now they've waited until the Raspberry Pi has totally cornered that market, and now they've brought out a similar single board computer. They just seem to be so off the pace. And Jezero, who loves to beat his Firefox OS hate drum, was posting on Google Plus about this, saying, why didn't they just support one of the myriad other boards that are available? Why do they have to bring out their own one? They could just bring out a build for the Raspberry Pi or the Odroid, or, there's plenty of them. Why don't they do that? I just don't understand it.
It does seem like an awful lot of make work, doesn't it? And if you've got a foundation there that's getting in several $100 million a year, it's got to be spent on something.
Yeah, I suppose it just boils down to, as you say, they've got all this cash floating around and they spend it on something. God forbid they might actually spend some money making their browser better and faster. But, that's just not what they're about, it seems.
Sadly, it does seem that way. But let's stay on the topic of SBCs. And we mentioned the Pi and A64 when we were talking about the Remix Mini recently, because they both have largely the same bits inside them. And I just wanted to flag up how popular these sort of boards currently seem to be. I mean, as we're recording, there are still 2 weeks to go on the Pine's Kickstarter, but it's already gotten around $900,000 pledged when the original goal was just for $32,000. I can see this sort of board really helping drive the maker community in 2016. And that could be a very positive thing, I think, if some of these boards start coming out that are a little bit more free and open source software friendly.
Yeah, looking at this got me thinking about Purism, funnily enough, and their Librem laptops that were supposed to be totally free software, but because they're x86 and modern Intel Core i5 and 7 and stuff processors, that's just never going to happen because Intel are never going to open the firmware enough to allow that. But now that these ARM processors are getting more and more powerful, you're getting 64-bit versions with quad-core and octa-core and decent clock speeds, maybe it would be possible for someone to build an ARM-based laptop with 3 or 4 gigs of RAM that is actually decent and can do most day-to-day tasks running Linux. I wouldn't expect it to be able to do everything that an x86 laptop can do, but maybe that is the solution to this freedom and privacy problem that we have, that you can't have a totally free software laptop. Maybe you could have one if it was ARM-based.
I remember going to an open hardware discussion at Mozilla headquarters in London, and there was a guy there talking about the difficulty they'd had making sure that the people in China who are making these chips do it in a purely open way. And if you're not doing it by the million, by the billion, they don't care what your requirements are. They are known to produce chips, and they do it the cheapest, easiest way, which is always with all sorts of proprietary blobs around the place. And I wonder whether or not you would be able to say it needs to be like this, this, and this. And if you're only making, 10,000, whether they would, or whether they would do as the KDE tablet did, which I think was what the guy was talking about. Like the KDE tablet, it hit the problems that they would request this exact specification, and while the demo unit might have that, the people who are producing it are like, well, this other one's close enough, we'll now make it with this one. This one's a bit like it, we'll make it with that one. And you don't actually have the sort of way of pinning them down in the way that you would expect in Europe and the Western countries, that when you say something it's going to be like that. There's a lot less kind of rigor about the way in which they're producing them because they're seen as not as important. The open source part isn't as important. I also wonder whether you're trying to slyly get a prediction in away from our prediction section.
No, well, I wrote my predictions a few days ago. Maybe I'll add that in. Yeah, good thinking. But let's end the news with an excellent and positive story, and that is the Greater London Lug are having another meetup on Thursday, the 28th of January, so not long now, at the same place that we've had the last couple of meetups, which is the Mulberry Bush pub near Waterloo Station. So, Jesse, are you coming to this?
Yeah, it's in the diary.
Excellent, and I'll be there, and I'm going to try and get the usual crowd there as well as the kind of London Lug people. So if you're in or around London on Thursday the 28th of January, come along and say hello. But with that, let's move on then. I'm absolutely delighted to say that we're joined by Phelim Whiteley, who is a listener of the show, who we met at OggCamp and started talking about Android and living without Google Apps. and we thought, we'll get him on the show. So welcome to the show, Phelim.
Hey, how's it going?
I can't complain. So the first question, can you give us a little bit, I don't want your whole life story, but just a little bit about yourself so that we're not going in cold here.
Okay, I would have probably got to know a lot of the people from OggCamp through Lug Radio initially. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, if you can't tell by the accent. I got into Linux probably just before uni back in 97, dabbled with it, and moved to Glasgow 2003, where I switched to it fully, and I've been using it since. In Glasgow, I worked as a help desk guy in a call center. Eventually ended up taking over running the IT for them. Eventually ended up moving to Lyon in France in 2007, where I worked freelance and I did a bit of programming, a bit of system admin, and then moved back to Dublin in 2010. So I guess I would call myself a bit of a developer, but a bit of a sysadmin as well. So a bit of a jack of all trades.
And we've got you on the show because, as we said, you are using your phone, an Android phone, without any Google apps. Why is that?
I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one. I guess I initially used to have a Nokia phone. Quite honestly, I don't really care about phones too much, but it was a non-smartphone back in 2010. When I got back to Ireland, it was kind of giving up the ghost, and I thought, I'll go for it. I'll try one out. And I bought myself a very luxurious Samsung Galaxy 5. It sounds like that should be good. It really isn't. It's also known as a Galaxy Europa, or the i5500, and it's quite honestly terrible. Now that I look at pictures of it, I can't believe I actually managed to use that for so long. But it came with Google 2.3.6. And I tried it out for a few weeks and I found myself to be very reluctant to try out new apps on it. There's a whole Play Store absolutely loaded with stuff. I think I tried Angry Birds on it, like I'm sure everybody did back in the day, because that was all the rage at the time. And I just found myself struggling to try stuff out because I didn't really trust what was on the store. I didn't know what the apps are doing behind the scenes. You know, if I was to put data into them, like it was a calendaring app or anything like that, would I ever get that data back out? If I decided I want to change somewhere else, if there was any export features. Because I've been in the situation where you've got a PC, you know, you start using an Office application or whatever, and then it turns out that they kill that off, or, you know, the next version doesn't support that feature, and you end up with a file that you can't use. And I kind of learned to, I guess, not trust an application if I can't get access to it. You know, I'm not saying I could, and I'm no Java developer, but if I had to, I could get somebody to get the data out if it wasn't exportable in an easy way. So I've been burned by it before, and I also really didn't trust Google. Now, I know they're a big company and it's in their best interest to keep their customers happy, but I always had a weird nagging feeling about it. Like, I had no proof at the time. You know, it was pre-Snowden, all that sort of stuff. You know, you're a bit of a crackpot if you thought anybody was really out there spying on you. So that wasn't the real thing. It was more, I didn't really know why does this app that is, you know, a small game need a fine GPS position? It just made absolutely no sense. So I didn't enjoy using it, to be honest. So I was really struggling with it, and I thought, you know, I don't trust this device in my pocket. So then my brother introduced me to CyanogenMod and said, you know, it's just Android. They've just ripped out all the Google stuff and it's pretty much open. So through a very painful set of trying to figure out what bit did what with the flashing utilities, you know, I think it was Odin was the tool that you used at the time. Maybe you still do. And it was getting a Cyanogen version onto that, to be honest, didn't give me any new features. It matched exactly the same version of Android I was using at the time, but now I had an open OS. So then it came to using a repo, and I'd already kind of been doing a lot of research, and I found F-Droid at the time. And while in that sort of time period, it wasn't a colossal amount of software on it, everything that I needed to use was there. So I said, I'm sure I can make this. I can give it a go anyway. If I don't like it, I've backed up my original ROM. I can always jump back to it if I want to. So I gave it a go, and yeah, kind of never looked back. And to be honest, think it's around 2011. I'm not 100% sure, but certainly the mid part of 2011, I'm pretty sure of it. I could swear I tweeted it, but I checked and I couldn't find it. So you'll have to take my word for it.
So it's not a case of a freedom perspective and the software freedom. It's more a case of the tracking and the not liking Google and people having your data.
I'd say it's a combo of the two, because it's more of a selfish software freedom, if I can phrase it that way, where I don't get stung because, if you've got access to the source code, the worst case, you just have to get access to your data by paying somebody to work on it. If you don't do Java, then I'm sure you can get somebody to do it. But it's more of it's selfish free software, maybe. I don't know what you'd call it that way. I wouldn't say I'm a Stallman sort of level of free software supporter, but I am certainly sliding towards that direction. I try not to use software if it's proprietary or closed. Things like Flash Video, yeah, fair enough, because to avoid it up until lately has been pretty difficult if you want to see anything. So I would say I'm pragmatic, but I'm also of the opinion that I would avoid software if I knew it was probably going to be nice and shiny. Like, I wouldn't go and use, say, a proprietary video editor on my Linux box, because it might be really good. And I don't want to look at it and go, really good, but I can't really consciously use it because I know it's not open, and I'm going to get into my position where I'm not happy to sort of be vulnerable, I guess would be the word I'd use for it. That makes sense.
It does, and it brings up an interesting point, because you're talking about how you're getting to the same state that you were in before when you were using Android, and you eventually got back to that state using free and open apps. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here on the desktop as well, isn't it? That it's quite hard work to get to that stage. And to go past that, I mean, that's the question, whether you can do that or not.
Well, I think I have. I think I may have I guess you have to look at some users. Like, you'd see people in my family, they might use a phone and they'd see, the latest, I don't know, Drunk Birds comes out, or God knows what they're all called these days. They'll play that and they'll try it out and then chuck it away. And that they have this very disposable sort of mindset when it comes to apps. I still maybe appreciate's a bit of a harsh word, but I still look at a piece of software and treat it like it's an actual functioning piece of software that I care about a bit more than, say, the 70 cents throwaway, let's just try this out, if I don't like it, get rid of it piece of software. So when I go looking for an app to do a job, I'm pretty strict with what I put on. I don't like putting on software and throwing it away, and quite often I would really take a look at the way the software works and see if I'm happy with how it goes before I invest any time working on it.
So how do you actually go about investigating the app before you put it on? I mean, I am very much of the opinion that if I want to look for both on Linux and on Android, if I want to look for an application that, is a text editor, for example, or, I mean, I did on my spare S3, I put CyanogenMod on, and I didn't install Google Apps, and I was looking through F-Droid, and I wanted to get a note-taking app so that I could actually take notes on the phone as I was using it, as things came to me. So I installed 3, and I'll do the same on Linux, I'll do the same on Android, I'll install between 3 and 5, and I'll just mess around with each of them, and within 20 seconds of the first few, I will not like the interface, or something is awkward, or I'll have to sign up, what have you, and I'll get rid of it, and I'll use that process to get to the one I like. Whereas it sounds like you don't install them, but you then select them some other way. How do you actually get to know if you're going to like the application or not without just using it?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. There will always be the stage where you try it out, and I do that, and there could be a case where I do try 2 or 3 of them out as well. But if I was looking for a note-taking app, well, I did exactly the same thing as you did. So when I went looking for it, I knew that I wanted it to have a web sort of side to it where I could sync it somewhere. I knew I wanted it to run on my own server. So, immediately you start eliminating things there. You may see in F-Droid, they won't have necessarily, pure open services all the time. Like Telegram's in there, for instance. It's a special version of Telegram, but it does talk to the Telegram servers. So it's not necessarily a Faro GPL sort of levels. So I would go looking for a note-taking app, and I'd know needs to have the criteria of fitting on my server. I'd take a look at the GitHub page sometimes if I'm really feeling eager, and I'd just take a look to see if it's a bit Mickey Mouse or not. Like if it's just one file or 3 files, you think, well, it can't be doing that much. Take a look at it. You know, I'm not looking for a line count of code or anything because, you know, clearly line count is the best way to determine how good software is, as we all know. But I'd try and eliminate, I'd see if the guys made a lot of changes to that software. Is that software actually getting updated all the time? You know, because I don't want to start using it and then it gets abandoned and then you end up having to either look after it yourself or go looking for something else, or, you know. So I kind of look at it in a few ways. So I'd look at it all those sort of ways. Then I would end up in the end giving it a go as well.
You mentioned there that you run your own server, Phelim. I presume that's for backing up data and doing sync services and such like. I guess that is the big killer, really, when you're doing this sort of activity and not using like Google services.
Yeah. To be honest, I use OwnCloud mainly because it wouldn't necessarily be always me using it. Now, I know you can split out each of the individual components, but to be honest, I'm not trying to sound like some sort of amazing Wall Street executive, but I don't have the time, and I don't have the time to track each individual package. Like I know Sabre is one of the components and all that. Funnily enough, when you guys did a review of it a long time ago, you actually gave different examples of different packages for the calendaring and all that, and I'd actually never heard them because I never found them, because I actually went looking a long time for individual bits, because usually it's a better way of doing it. But OwnCloud had a good set of developers behind it, was timely updates to it, and while it might have been big, it's certainly nothing I can sort of check through myself if I was looking at each individual bit and then maintaining them as I went along. And as I said, it might not necessarily be me as well that might be looking at it. So I wanted something that had a nice interface that I could get calendaring to, contacts up there, note-taking, file sharing, and I got it all with that. And it's been really good. I use DavDroid as a agent on the phone that syncs the contacts, the tasks, calendar, and I've got the file sharing in the actual OwnCloud app itself, where I can share PDF files, whatever. I have a lot of O'Reilly books I use for coding and stuff because I do contract work. So it's very handy for me to be off site and have access to all the sort of documentation that I would not want to be lugging around in a trolley behind me. So it's very handy having all the PDFs there. So I use something like Mu PDF, which is very handy for just looking at standard files. I mean, nothing spectacular about it. And I use things like My Own Notes, which is a very, very simple note-taking app that links into a directory on OwnCloud, and it's just text files. Really, really simple. Because, you know, I've used XML or markup based ones, and yeah, it's all fine and well until it doesn't really go well properly. Something breaks, end up with a horrific file that you've got to try and pick your actual data out of the markup out of, and then, you know, you end up with a mess. So simple text files, perfect. Just store links in it, whatever. Very simple notes. It's no problem. I don't want to use the calendaring or the contacts, and there's nothing worse than having to redo your phone and you've wiped all your contacts off of it. So very important to sort of get OwnCloud set up with that too, and it's been really good. I've got, I don't know, 200-300 contacts up there because I'm so popular. But, you know, it's a very simple sort of way to make sure that's all synced up.
Yeah, I can't imagine for any of us that have got multiple devices not having some sort of cloud facilities to actually do all of this. But it does put another burden upon you as a end user to actually run and maintain a server infrastructure as well, doesn't it?
That's true, but you can actually get hosted on cloud as well. So, you know, if somebody's not up to the job, then, you know, there's people out there providing service. The guys who actually run on cloud themselves, you know, it's a small sort of fee that you could pay for. I'm not sure if they have a free option. I don't know, but they certainly have the option there. So if you're not willing to do it yourself, there's definitely people out there who are doing it. So it sort of allows you to take advantage of that if it's not your thing.
But don't you also then have to find applications which are written and built to use the back end, which is OwnCloud? Whereas if you're using something off of the Play Store, you can basically guarantee that it's going to back up to a Google service, or, well, I guess it'll be a Google service or one of their own services. But because they can write their own code to run on their own servers, you know that the independent note-taking app will be synced up with all your devices. But to have a calendar application and a contacts application and a note-taking and et cetera, which all have to back up to OwnCloud, doesn't that really restrict? I mean, I'm asking a genuine question because I don't know how it is with F-Droid and the apps and things, but do you not have to be very careful to make sure that they're compatible with OwnCloud?
To a certain extent you do, but that's the kind of beauty where DavDroid comes in. I'm sure there's others, but DavDroid is essentially, it will talk to a lot of backends. So it's a sort of a broker, I guess you could call it, sits in between, and it has a list of certain ones that it does, but it's standard protocols that they're using. It's IMAP, it's CalDAV, CardDAV for the contacts. The note-taking is simple file share. It's, just passing back and forth text files. So, all simple stuff. It's kind of eliminating the complexity that a lot of software tries to do, where if I was looking at an app that was designed by somebody and they designed the server and then it's, talking all its own protocols and all that, you're bound to end up in a situation where one version doesn't quite work well and they break something and then it all disappears horribly. I've been there. It's not fun. So trying to get the software as simple as it can be, yet still doing its task, and if it needs to, working with different libraries, then I think that's the best way to go, because, if OwnCloud goes horribly wrong at the end of it, well, fair enough, but if it speaks CardDAV, then I can replace it with something that does speak CardDAV. If it uses the standard calendaring stuff, yeah, we'll just use that.
Yeah, we're talking about open standards here, aren't we?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, well, let's assume the listener is savvy enough to set up their own server and run these services. Can we talk about applications for a minute? Because there are some, like Gmail or Feedly, which I take for granted on my Android device, and I would struggle to live without. I mean, I've tried things like K9 for mail and really not liked it at all. I mean, can you just run through some of the apps you've got so we can see where the gap is, if you like?
Sure. Well, you're not going to like my mail app because it is K9. And I use that with about 5 email accounts. I found it to be an email app. It sends and receives email, groups them in the folders that I want. I've got a work account that I have. I talk to a client's mail server. I've got my personal account. I've got if my server explodes in a ball of fire or I forget to renew my domain sort of account that goes through Google, and I talk to them all through that, and it works fine, never let me down sort of thing. So I've always been happy enough with it.
I guess it's partly familiarity, to be honest, because I have tried different email apps, as I say, but I like Gmail, and there are some things I really dislike about it, like the fact it always threads everything is very hateful. But things like push notifications are really, really useful. I mean, does K9 actually support push now?
Yeah, it does. I've got push notifications on my phone. I believe the way it works is it talks to the server every now and again, creates a long-running thread, and then it just gets a ping back from the server, as far as I know. I've never looked at the internals, but I definitely get push email, all right, yeah.
So other applications we had, by complete fluke, a guy called Mike DuPont wrote in, and he mentioned NewPipe to us as a YouTube application, which I saw is on F-Droid. Is that what you use for YouTube, or are you more of a native?
That's exactly what I use. That's quite funny. All right, so I obviously owe that guy a beer then, because it's quite handy. Because YouTube, the website, is just a nightmare to use. I don't know what reason it is. I think it might be to do with the free browser doesn't have quite the right plugins or doesn't browse it properly, but it's always been trouble. And yeah, stumbled across NewPipe. It's really good. Makes YouTube usable again, essentially.
One of the main things I use my phone for is GPS navigation, turn by turn, and just maps generally. And Google Maps is absolutely brilliant for that, I find. So what do you use? Do you use it for that at all?
Yeah, Google Maps is great for letting everybody know where you are in Google.
They can tell by the triangulation of the towers anyway where I am, so, you know.
I use OSM, and I find it's fantastic. I do a bit of traveling for work or OggCamp or whatever, and being able to actually go on, download the actual map files that I want, not just hope that the trickery sort of way. You have to get Google Maps to store the files on your machine when you're going off abroad, and then it's going to charge you through the nose when it starts downloading all the different sections when you're in France or God knows where. I just find it fantastic. It's because it's a GPS app. It should have the maps on board. You know, if there's no network because you're in the middle of a mountain range, then the satellites are there. You should be able to navigate properly. So I just find OSM and is fantastic, and OpenStreetMap in general, to be quite honest, it's really, really good.
Yeah, a little look at OSM and it actually caught me by surprise that I had to select what maps I wanted. It does like a generic UK map, so that you've got a sort of very high level view, but then you have to pick London and the southeast and bits and bobs, and it downloads it all. Seemed a little bit.
Yeah, it will also do on the fly, but you know, it depends on how good your network is or where you are. But you know, if you want to avoid that, it's kind of handy to be able to turn it off as well. And then you just take a snapshot of the map from whatever time zone. And it's got a very nice download and update feature. So, you know, you can see when your maps are horrifically out of date and you need to update them. And you can do it in your Wi-Fi.
So, Phelim, you clearly fall on the side of people who are either don't need 1,000 million apps on their phone or are happy with the ones which are alternatives for the day-to-day ones that everyone really needs and uses. Have you thought about an alternative to Android, i.e. the Ubuntu phone or Sailfish or Tizen or something like this? Because the reason that we haven't switched to them, having reviewed them and looked at them and thought about them, is that they lack the applications which we use every day. So are they potentials for you?
Yeah, I did actually try. I tried twice, in fact. I obviously had that terrible old Samsung Europa. From that, I went to a ZTE Open, and I was thinking, you know, I use email, a bit of chat, you know, it should be fine. It should be fairly simple. I've got a small subset of apps that I use. Surely it can manage it. And I was woefully disappointed because it was terrible. An OS with a locked version of a browser version, and everything in JavaScript running on a painfully slow processor with very little memory. Yeah, it was terrible. I liked the idea, or let's say I liked the idea. Obviously, this is dead now. So, yeah, I tried. And then from that, I moved to the Geeks Phone Revolution, because that was a phone that had both Android and Firefox on it. I thought, well, okay, I can try Firefox on a more powerful phone, see if it works. Yeah, no, it was still fairly poor, and getting updates to it was terrible. You know, you're trying to get a version of your browser upgrade to actually have to update the OS to do it. I mean, that's why it failed, if you ask me. And well, okay, I have no problem with web apps if the web apps kind of do the job, but I never had one of them that worked well. I tried some of the chat stuff. It just was no good. No offense to the developers, but something wasn't right with how it all worked together. I've never tried anything outside Android, to be honest, because things like Sailfish, it's not really open, so I'm not going to invest too much time in something that's not open, because, well, I'll end up in a position where I don't want to be. Now, something like a Ubuntu phone potentially could be really good. I've seen Popey demo it, like I'm pretty sure everybody has seen Popey demo it. I think that's the only way you can actually see a Ubuntu phone in the wild is with Popey. So I have tried it out when he had it there in the pub for OggCamp and stuff. And yeah, I like the gestures. I think that is a potentially way to do it. It's a bit unusual, but I'm sure you get the hang of it pretty quick, like we do with most of the stuff when it changes. Fair enough. We don't like change, but you know, sometimes it's good. So yeah, it could potentially be something. Now, if it ever adapts with the hardware or what, I don't know. But I like the fact that in the back end, it is an actual OS that you can look at. You can download the source code. You can tweak it if you need to. I'm not going to probably do it myself, but you know, it's available to us there if we wanted to.
But it's not attractive enough for you to have bought one of the phones, like the BQ phones, for example.
No, I don't know. I guess I have I don't know whether to say a poor opinion of phones. I don't value them as much as I would say a laptop. I'd imagine, you know, you see a lot of people spending a fair amount of cash or buying new phones all the time. It was to compare that to buying a nice fancy laptop that you had to walk around with or run for trains or buses with whilst wearing a pair of oven mitts, you know, and it potentially sliding and smashing. It's not something I really want to invest too much cash in. So I'm pretty much happy when I found something I like and it's stable, because, you know, the main job of a phone is it's got to take calls, got to send messages, emails, got to be reliable. Because, you know, it's probably your livelihood to connect it to it. It certainly is if you're a contractor. So,
well, it's funny that kind of brings us around to a conclusion, and something that I've been thinking all the way through this is it sounds like your phone isn't your primary computing device. And I mean, you've basically said there that it isn't. Whereas I would say that, in all honesty, mine is. I do use a couple of laptops. I've got a Chromebook. I've got a desktop computer. But really and truly, in terms of number of hours used, my phone is my primary computer. And that's why I can't make compromises. Or, well, okay, not making that's the wrong way of looking at it. But I can't value freedom and privacy over ease of use and pragmatism. And you talked about using open source software for pragmatic reasons. Well, I use proprietary software on my phone for pragmatic reasons, because I know that Google Maps is really good. I mean, OSM and might be good, but I know that Google Maps is rock solid. And there's certain apps that I use from the Play Store that I know are going to work perfectly for me. And so for me, the effort of trying to replace them with FOSS alternatives, I don't know, it just doesn't, it's obviously not worth it enough to me. Otherwise I would have done it by now, because I run CyanogenMod, but the first thing I flash is GApps with it.
Yeah. Funny note, I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because I was listening to your last podcast and you were doing a review of the year and you talked about Windows 10, and you said you were so happy that you have Linux on the desktop because you wouldn't want all the spying stuff and all those things. And if you think about it, a mobile phone, unlike a desktop PC, which sits in the crufty corner, sucking up all the dirt off the floor so you don't have to hoover too much, has a GPS device. It tracks you by your carrier all around the place, and you've got it sitting in your pocket 24/7 essentially. And all of those apps have integrated Google Analytics that tell the developer, tell Google how often you press what button, you know, where you lingered, how they can target you for their next financial sort of idea. You know, it's a heck of a lot of info about you. And I don't know, I think it's worth a bit of effort to try and see if you could live without.
I think the problem that the three of us have is that we've gone so far down the path of convenience to then backtrack is very difficult. But to have gone from the Nokia you're talking about and the terrible Samsung, which doesn't even have an S in front of it, so it must be terrible. It means that you know you've. I think if you'd only seen the walled garden that was F-Droid, obviously it's not a walled garden. You take my point. You would only know that much. Whereas, dare I say it, there are a whole bunch of apps there is not even a remote equivalent on F-Droid that I use every single day. But because I've had I don't want to say my eyes open as if some sort of like miracle moment, but because I got used to them, and there's not even a remote equivalent, I would find it very difficult to go to a fully free App Store, because I would miss those many apps that I use, there's not an equivalent at all.
You've eaten from the forbidden fruit.
that is the problem. I feel we probably all have.
Well, it's like the video editor you were talking about. There might be this amazing proprietary video editor, but you don't want to try it out because it might be really good. And it seems that you've got enough self-control to have used only F-Droid and similar free software all this time up to now. So unlike us who have just been too curious, it seems that I don't know. I think it goes back to the fact that it isn't your main machine, is it? I mean, you presumably you've got a laptop, which is you spend most of the time on.
Sure. I wouldn't fancy doing coding or sysadmin from a phone. I mean, I have written it. I've written a bit of ncurses library so I can actually reboot the server out, trashing it whilst I was logged in through an SSH session. But, you know, day in, day out, for my job, it wouldn't really do the job. You know, it wouldn't work. But I think while you guys are sort of, you're stuck in the apps. I think you should analyze what those apps do. Do they really do anything particularly amazing? Or are there a whole load of different functions that are, quite easily replicated by a web service or by some other app or using it in a different way? I'm not saying it's for everybody. I really would never advocate it for everybody. I don't stand there on the main street in Dublin preaching about the ways of the open phone or anything like that. I certainly would not inflict on anybody. And there's many a time where I would go, I wish I could just use, a iPhone or God knows what. It would be a nice way to do that, but I can't let myself do it because I've been on a situation where I've been stung by, the license being rejected for the company where, we were relied on a very important piece of software, but, due to budget constraints, they said, oh, we can't use that anymore. And now you're stuck and you're having to scramble to piecemeal something together through either something you've written yourself or beg, borrow, or stealing something. It's not a good place to be. So I'm not kind of coming from it purely from a, just trying things out and, oh, they're all shiny and lovely. It's more, it's actually done damage by not using open stuff before.
Well, Phelim, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. We've kind of run out of time. We're a bit over anyway, but hopefully you can come back on and chastise us a bit more and tell us what's what. Because, it's been really great talking to you.
You too. And hopefully I'll see you all soon again for next OggCamp, eh?
Exactly. Thanks, Phelim.
Thanks, Phelim.
See you guys.
On to the feedback then. And first of all, a huge thanks to George Hangs and an anonymous person for your PayPal donations. And thanks a lot to Andrew Nair for becoming a new monthly supporter. And of course, to our existing monthly supporters. And a special huge thanks to Ian Barton, who sent me a Nexus 5 for free. And I can't believe it. Okay, it's got a smash screen, but it's still a Nexus 5. I'd been talking about how I regretted selling mine because there are quite a few ROMs available for it, and I'd like to play with the KDE one, the Plasma Mobile. And so he emailed us and then sent me it, and I couldn't believe it. So I've had a good play with it, and I had a play with Plasma Mobile, and I'm afraid wasn't very impressed. And then I thought, right, I'm going to fix this thing. So I bought a screen, or well, rather the glass bit that goes on top of the screen, because that's all that was broken. Took it all to bits, and then realized, this is actually going to be a lot harder than I thought. So it's still all in bits, and I may well have to buy the digitizer, which is significantly more expensive. But either way, I'm going to get a very cheap Nexus 5 once I put it all back together, which is definitely not going to go badly. It's definitely going to go well. I'm staying positive about this. I'm going to have a Nexus 5 to add to my collection. So thank you so much, Ian. It's really, really appreciated.
Well, moving into the feedback proper then, and going back a few shows to when we were talking about Mozilla, Will got in touch and said, regarding your Mozilla discussion, I was a little surprised you asked if Yahoo would want to renew the contract when it comes up for renewal in a few years. Isn't the more relevant question whether or not Yahoo will still be around by the time the contract expires? I'm not sure what Mozilla's backup plan would be if they can't crawl back to Google. Also, the Pocket integration annoys me greatly, but I take Mozilla at its word when it says that it added Pocket support for the benefit of its users and that it does not receive any money from Pocket. Regarding Jesse's point about it being okay for Firefox to lose market share if it maintains its user count, this isn't really acceptable for Mozilla because their stated mission is to promote openness, innovation and opportunity on the web. The less relevant Firefox is as a browser, the less clout Mozilla has to push for what it wants for web standards.
Hang on a minute. They're not making any money from Pocket. So it wasn't just a dodgy decision based on getting some money. It was just they did it because they thought it would be a good idea.
It does sound a little bit bizarre because the whole furore was that it was proprietary and being in there without anyone having a choice over it. So you'd think that if they're promoting openness, that they wouldn't be forcing proprietary software in at the install of their web browser.
It's very strange. You'd think someone would take the code for Firefox and strip out all of the bloat and unnecessary things like Pocket and kind of recompile it and make a new product.
I'm getting ahead of ourselves, are we?
Yes. Maybe we might have to talk about that at some point soon.
Yeah, tune in next time, guys. I think it's a fair question about Yahoo, though. I mean, I'm not going to put in our predictions because I don't think Yahoo will fold this year. But I think they are in a definite death spiral, and it's not going to be a very happy year for them. I mean, they are only being kept afloat by the Alibaba side of the business at the moment.
Well, it is a name that belongs to a bygone era of the web, isn't it? I mean, there was a time when it was popular, but there was a time when MySpace was popular as well. And, you know, people move on, things become unfashionable, and then ultimately die, although MySpace is actually still going, believe it or not. So maybe it'll truck along and be very small and insignificant, but I suppose it could die. I don't know. I've got too many predictions coming up. I'm sitting on the fence on this one.
Go on then, Jesse, move it along.
Okay, well, we heard from Velt Technologies saying, thanks Linux Luddites for your discussion on VeltOS. We've taken a number of your points to mind, which I think is probably the most polite way they could have responded to our maybe not so positive review of VeltOS. But, you know, it's good that they listened and maybe are taking some of those points to heart. We also heard back from Riley Brandt following the photo course review. He says, thanks so much for the very detailed review. I really wasn't expecting such a thorough breakdown of the course, so I was pleasantly surprised to hear you go into detail about many different aspects of it. It was great feedback for me to hear what worked for you. I was even happier to hear that you'll be shooting in RAW and possibly leaving JPEG behind. Once I felt comfortable editing RAW photos, I never went back to JPEG. Have fun editing photos in FOSS. So, thanks again, Riley. I did appreciate the course. We heard back from one of our listeners, Ian, who says that he enjoyed the review, and following it, he may well go on to do the course. So I'm glad that some of our listeners are able to, you know, get something out of this. I would recommend, if you're trying to up your photography skills, it is a great one to do, and obviously because it uses all FOSS software, really a good one to recommend.
And Chris Phillips got in touch and said, I listened to the latest show with great interest, especially regarding the home automation segment. I thought I'd share my setup as I'm super happy with it and thought you might be interested. I too have some of those fancy radio-controlled sockets, so I was delighted when a colleague put me onto Domotics, which I run on my original Raspberry Pi, coupled with a RFXCOM-RF. I'm not reading all that out. A transceiver, put it that way. And this was clearly aimed at you, Jesse.
Yeah, I've in the past looked for ways to do sort of smart home type things, and every time there's been one called Smart House, I think it is, and another one for OpenZWave, which is a controller I've got, but I've never really had a lot of luck, and I've never heard of Domotics, so that's DOMOTICZ. And I've since flashed up on the Raspberry Pi, and it works with my OpenZWave device. There's a whole raft of things you can do. It's got, you know, curtains and lights that you can turn on and off. You can automate doors and security programs and cameras, and you can sort of have a floor plan of your house. And as things happen at different places, you can make other objects turn on or off, or close the curtains and have timers and security setup. So it is a huge number of things. Loads of open protocols feed into it. So not just this transceiver that he's talking about, not just OpenZWave, but all sorts of temperature sensors and cameras and things. So it is a huge bit of software that I'd never ever heard of, and it runs very nicely with the Raspberry Pi and just has a web UI where you set it all up and get things running. So I'm quite excited to get into this. So thanks a lot for that, Chris.
Well, as we alluded to several times during the show today, we talked about our previous predictions on the last show, and HAL 9009 got in touch with regards to the prediction about DevWAN that Joe and Jesse were discussing. And it was really to do with derivative distributions, and much like HAL 9009, I queried this off-air while we were recording that session, because I too thought of PC Linux OS as being a non-systemd derivative distribution. But that wasn't really what your prediction was about, was it, Jesse?
No, it was just about a fork of Debian which they'd stripped systemd out of or replaced it with something. We heard from John Hanks on Google Plus saying, Paddy's Docker prediction was low-hanging fruit, but speaks less about technology than it does about the human herd-following instinct. I'm old enough to recall the introduction of the dynamically linked library, and one of the big arguments for it was to ease security and bug fixes without the need to recompile everything linked against a broken version. Enter Docker. Now we have giant, bloated, statically built containers that are complex to update. But wait, there's more. We need these because some developers can't be bothered to build an app in a way that it can be simply installed. Or even worse, containers solve the problem of an irrational religious devotion to a particular distribution by letting the devotee carry it around to everything the devotee touches, probably without having updated it and having originally created it on their own malware-infected Windows laptop. I'm seeing containers presented as a solution to all sorts of problems that basically can all be tracked back to poor developer choices and attitudes. My prediction, or hope, is that this year people will begin to see that hiring better developers is superior to using containers. In the meantime, I'll cross my fingers that my credit card isn't lost in the first big unupdated container-related security breach incident. So I get the impression, roughly, that John isn't a big container fan.
Amen, brother.
I mean, do you guys genuinely think that if all programs were written absolutely perfectly, you wouldn't need containers, and therefore it's people who are unable to write secure code, which is meaning that we have to put things into containers that then can't affect anything else? I mean, having something in a very well-protected, containered location means that you can't get, in theory, you can't get root access, you can't start messing around with the network, you can't start infecting other things on the system. But is it not true, and would it not be fair to say that as soon as you write some code, no matter how good you are, there is the possibility of there being an error, a problem, or even something in the future changing which causes a security hole or a vulnerability in your code, which was up until then very, very good. And by having everything in containers, it means it's sort of a belts and braces type approach.
Yeah, you'd hope so, but I tend to be on the same side as John here, where I think a lot of people are just seeing it as a way to get around having to make that effort in the first place. And, I mean, it always disappoints me immensely when people say, yeah, bugs are inevitable, it's just a fact of life and we have to live with it. I mean, there's such low expectations, it's no wonder we've got such poor quality code out there.
That wraps up the feedback for this show. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxluddites.com, or on Twitter, Facebook, or Google+, or you can always leave a comment on the website. But let's move on and talk about our predictions for 2016. So last show we talked about our predictions for 2015, and strangely I didn't get mine all right. So this time I've gone for some more solid ones, I think. But let's start with you, Paddy. What's your first prediction for 2016?
Yeah, I've tried to go for some more solid ones as well. I mean, mine were egregiously vague last time around. So let's stick with the Linux one initially, and one that will be very easily measured at the end of the year. We talk about Google an awful lot on this show, and obviously they produce Android and Chrome OS, both of which are based on Linux, but they don't really seem to care for Linux as a desktop operating system much at all. So my first prediction is that by the end of the year, there will still not be an official Google Drive client available for the Linux desktop.
Well, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I don't see why they would bother when they've got a reasonable web app, as they would call it. Why would you need one? And I know that you could make a million arguments for why you would need one, but yeah, I agree with you on that one.
So in our last predictions, I predicted that Ubuntu would release a new software manager with the aim of being able to incorporate snap packages. And while it was really, really close, and I still in my heart claim it as a win, it didn't really quite make it. I'm predicting that this year I will be able to install snap packages on Ubuntu. By the end of the year, that will be a thing.
Okay, do you mean in the standard version of it? Or do you think there'll be another version that is snap-based?
Yeah, I mean, in the standard one. I mean, it'll have to work in parallel with Debian packages, but I think that there will be maybe a few tester applications or sort of key core applications that they trial, but I think that you'll be able to install snap packages on Ubuntu.
I'm not convinced on that one, I'm afraid. So my first prediction is that there will be a new Raspberry Pi model released this year.
I mean, is that it? Are you not going to specify whether it's going to be bigger or faster or slower or smaller, or what niche is it going to fill?
Okay, well, I want a definite win, So that's my prediction. Okay, but what I really think is this: that it will have built-in Wi-Fi. I think that's almost definitely going to happen, because that's the one thing that they're all lacking so far, and the one thing that things like chip offer. I think that there will definitely be one. It'll almost definitely have Wi-Fi built in, and it'll probably have storage on it as well. Some sort of storage. I would have thought maybe 4 or 8 gigabytes, but that is less. I'm much less sure of that, but Wi-Fi for sure. And in reality, probably still SD card will be the only storage on it, but it would be nice to see one with some faster internal storage.
It's funny because only earlier today I was messing around with my Raspberry Pis, and it occurred to me that we'd reviewed the chip, and it comes with things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And all the discussion that's on all the Raspberry Pi forums about which tiny little dongles work with and without, and which ones are better supported, it's just a stupid thing to have. You should just have a Wi-Fi chip on it. So I would like to see it, but unfortunately I don't want to see it, because then your prediction will come true.
Well, let's stay on the sort of tiny devices tack, because my second prediction is related to the Internet of Things, and I could probably be out by a year or so here, but I think there's a very large possibility that this year somebody will be killed as a result of a hack on an Internet of Things device.
Oh, this is a pretty deep prediction. I don't want you to predict, obviously, the accident or whatever might happen, but you're saying that the car gets locked in the garage and they can't get out? Or where would a scenario where this might happen?
Yeah, well, let your imagination run riot. I mean, I can think of all sorts of examples, from people controlling thermostats so that people get unduly hot and suffer heat exhaustion and die from that mechanism, or think of all sorts of things happening in the bathroom or anywhere else there's water, and electronic devices that can be controlled remotely. Yeah, but as I said, it's possibly a year or two early on this prediction. But
well, it might be a year or two early, but that only is because as the bracket for IoT things expands and the sheer number of them expand, it is inevitable that someone will faceplant a small circuit board and accidentally wipe out their own brain. It's just one of those things that with this many people in the world and that many IoT things, you must be able to make a link. So it's not happened so far. You're right, they're going to explode this year and next. So we'll see if someone on what can only be described as a tabloid type news article where they link the thermostat and the death of a family.
Well, let's hope they don't explode this year, otherwise Paddy's right. But
God, it took me ages.
Right, save us, Jesse, come on.
So there's been a lot of talk about convergence, not only from people who brought us that word in the Linux community, but also with Microsoft, and as we discussed things like the Lenovo Link earlier in the news. They're trying to bring everything together, and I think that where Linux is doing everything in the open, and there's a number of different parts coming together but they haven't quite gelled, my prediction is that someone will bring out a Linux converged device on a crowdfunding platform before anyone else does.
Hang on, sorry, back up a step. Someone will bring out a device before anyone else does.
Yeah, that's a bit obvious, isn't it? Now, what you're saying, I think, there is that an independent entity will bring out a converged device, or at least announce it on a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo before Canonical releases theirs.
Yes, I mean, that was my initial one, and then I realised that pinning it down to Canonical was maybe, while they are clearly out in the front when it comes to converged devices, there may well be someone else who suddenly ramps up their efforts. But I think that a device which switches between phone or tablet and PC and everything runs on both as one, the big players, let's say, so obviously Ubuntu, maybe it is also Amazon or someone else, will be beaten to it by an independent backyard guy on a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign.
It depends what you mean by beaten to it. Are you talking about shipping to consumers, actually out in the wild, in which case I don't think you're right. If you're talking about putting up a Kickstarter and making promises, then perhaps you are right, because it's relatively straightforward to do that, to make a nice slick video saying this is going to be what we're going to do in the future. But I think in terms of actually getting a conversion device into people's hands, it's not going to be an independent person on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. It's going to be Canonical or Microsoft or Amazon or one of the big players, as you say. You
reckon that Kickstarter is worse for announcing something and not delivering than Ubuntu? I will take that. I reckon that Ubuntu will probably announce something and then not deliver before Kickstarter announces and not deliver. So I will shake your hand on delivery of items.
Well, I was watching a show about that on my Ubuntu TV the other day. So
exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. And I know the Ubuntu TV was probably announced internally and externally and then dropped internally for better things and more effort onto the phone and things like this. And we shouldn't probably beat that drum, but that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. And so I reckon, yeah, we have to agree on I could put a Kickstarter up and announce it. So it should be on delivery of hardware. I think the big players will be beat on delivery of hardware by a crowdfunding campaign.
Hang on, this assumes that there will be a convergent device delivered to consumers this year.
Yeah. We're doing this year's predictions, right?
Yeah, but you're just taking that as a given that will happen this year.
Yeah, I'm making big predictions.
So yours is a kind of double prediction that it will definitely happen and it won't be Canonical or Amazon or whatever delivering that. That's quite bold.
Joe, this isn't my only double prediction. Let's carry on.
Before we do, can I jump in? Because I also had a prediction on convergence. So I know it's all out of order, but it does tie in. And I know I've said previously that it's inevitable, and I do think it is inevitable that someone will come out with one of these devices, or multiple people will come out with these devices. I've been thinking about it a lot recently. So my prediction is that this year, people will realise that convergence is actually irrelevant. And efforts from Microsoft, Google, Facebook, to provide a meta platform, if you like, where you can actually move around seamlessly, no matter what device you're using, will become increasingly prevalent. And the whole idea of physical device convergence will start going away.
That sounds a bit nebulous and hard to tie down this time next year.
Yeah, what do you mean by not related to a hardware device, but still having meta convergence?
In the way that today I can be doing an email on my phone, I put my phone down, pick up my laptop, and it's there because I'm using Gmail and it's instantly available in both places. I can see that being expanded sideways, if you like, out into other services. I mean, we've seen some of it with what Apple have been doing, to be fair, already. But I think people like Facebook and Google are going to be pushing very hard down that path. So the actual physical hardware device convergence becomes totally irrelevant, and it doesn't matter whose device you have, and all devices will become fundamentally commodity items, and it's just the software services, the software stack that's running in the cloud that is going to provide the convergent features for you.
Well, I think that's all quite a reasonable prediction of what's going to happen, but there's not a quantifiable win-lose.
Yeah, like sorry to interrupt you, Joe, but like you say, with Gmail and my calendar and messages and Hangouts in Hangouts, where do you draw the line between what we currently have today and what we're going to then look back on in December 2016?
Okay, fair point. I guess if you want something measurable then, because what I'm talking about here is the realisation that will slowly dawn on people that what we've been thinking of as convergence and what Canonical, for instance, are pushing as convergence is actually irrelevant and is going to be outmoded very, very quickly just by pure software. Let's go with Jesse's prediction that Canonical will deliver on device. I would agree with that. I would suggest it's going to get massive amounts of press, including in the mainstream normal media, if you like, so in newspapers like The Guardian and The Telegraph in this country, and it will flop. and people will suddenly realise they don't actually need it, and by 2017 it's likely that Canonical will be out of the phone business altogether.
It's funny you mentioned the mainstream press there, because as I said in an intro piece, I've made more than 4 predictions and whittled them down to the ones that I think are the most likely. And one of the ones I've actually discounted is that Ubuntu will release a converged device and will be compared eye to eye with another major offering like Microsoft. So it's interesting that you think that they will provide one or produce one, and it will be discussed in the mainstream press, and then will not get any traction and everything will be done in software. Okay, I think we've got to the bottom of this one. It's your turn, Joe.
Well, we haven't quite got to the bottom of it, because one of mine is as follows. Tizen will continue to do well in some markets. Ubuntu will release another phone and the fabled convergence device. Firefox OS and Sailfish will effectively die, as in no new phones or tablets will be released. There possibly will be some Firefox OS TVs, and I made this prediction before that single board computer was announced. So in terms of phones and tablets, there won't be any Firefox OS or Sailfish ones this year.
Oh, aren't I pleased I read the news before we actually started recording today?
There's a blank response. What's the item you're talking about?
Well, from what I saw earlier, it looks very much as though a Sailfish phone is going to be released in India within the next month or so.
Oh dear, Joe.
So I've failed before I've even started by not reading the news properly. Well, just because it's been announced doesn't mean it'll happen. So here's hoping that they'll go bust and not deliver, like with the tablets, that they will never deliver as well.
But it is quite a big prediction, quite a rambling prediction of things. So for it all to come true, or at least parts of it will come true, we'll have to dissect that in 12 months' time.
Well, the thing is with predictions, if you make it quite rambling and have loads of different predictions within it, then only one has to come true for you to spin it as a win.
Yeah, I mean, if you're unsure about your ability to predict the future, which I, guess I should be given my last sort of innings, or maybe I should have done what you're doing. Damn. Okay, whose prediction turn is it?
I think it's you, Jesse.
Okay. The Pi podcast. I note the tension in the air. The Pi podcast will review Mycroft on the Raspberry Pi. Now, talking about these double predictions, it does therefore predict that Mycroft will be openly available to run on the Raspberry Pi. The joy and the laughter I had from realizing this prediction was that either you'll have to choose not to review it on the Raspberry Pi podcast just to stop me from winning, or you will, through gritted teeth, have to review it, and then I will win.
Very clever. Well, given that Isaac backed the Kickstarter, I think it was, it's almost inevitable that we will talk about it on the show. But are you trying to say that it will be generally available without backing it, in terms of you won't need their hardware, you can do it with some of your own hardware and the Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, so I think you'll be able to load it onto a Raspberry Pi SD card, bang it in, and put whatever devices that you could run off of it and talk to your Raspberry Pi. Okay,
well, I think that's fairly solid, and you will be correct about that, so I'm going to agree with it. Okay, so my next one is Canonical won't get bought, and it won't have an IPO either, so it won't go public. Because I've heard a lot of speculation about them being bought by various companies, and I just think that's all complete nonsense. So there you have it. Canonical will just continue as they are, and no one's going to buy them.
Fair enough. I seem to remember a Mintcast a number of years ago in which you predicted the demise of Canonical, and I'm just trying to remember if that was 2017, maybe?
No, I think that was actually back on the Mindtech podcast, and I said that Canonical won't be around, and therefore Ubuntu as we know it now won't be around at the end of the decade, so by 2020. And so that means that there will probably be a fork of it because the code's there, but the company won't continue. That was the prediction then. Whether I still stick by it, well, I suppose I have to, don't I? Otherwise I'm going to look stupid. But I don't know. Let's just say I am sticking with it.
And your final one, Paddy?
Yeah, well, I wrote these down a couple of weeks back, so I was a little miffed to hear this actually on another podcast, particularly when their accuracy rate isn't normally that great. But anyhow, here we go. ButterFS, I think, will not be widely used this year. It will still have ongoing issues, and it will just quietly sort of trundle along beneath the surface as it has done for many, many years. But I do think ZFS will gain mainstream acceptance in Linux this year. Now, the one slight fly in the ointment here is this is dependent on what happens with System D, because if System D comes along and takes over package management across an awful lot of distros, and I'm not making that prediction, but it's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 years, I suspect. They currently seem to be favouring ButterFS for doing this sort of atomic installation and rollback procedures as opposed to ZFS. So if Linux decides to push ahead with that aspect of things, then I could well be wrong. But other than that, I can't see ButterFS getting any more acceptance than it has now, which is virtually none.
Right, that's a bit nebulous again. So do you mean that it's not going to be the default in any distros, or what?
I would say that, except you can never count out people like Fedora to do something completely crazy.
And it's the default in OpenSUSE.
Yeah.
Yeah, but after SUSE had been bought by Microsoft, it probably won't be.
Is that a prediction?
No, I kind of mentioned it in passing last time out. It isn't a prediction, but it does make sense. You think about the fact Microsoft have done some sort of deal with Red Hat, and none of us have got the full details of that deal or even know the length of it. I mean, Red Hat and SUSE are the enterprise distributions out there. I mean, Canonical, fair enough, make a really good fist of it on the server side of things, but from a desktop perspective, the only enterprise distributions worth noting are Red Hat and SUSE. So if Microsoft have got Red Hat tied up already, it would make sense if they were interested in that environment to actually just take SUSE out, and the easiest way would be to buy them.
Okay, we'll try and work out how we're going to measure this in December next year. And my final prediction is OpenOffice will produce Android and desktop collaborative editing apps. So as we currently have with Google Drive, where you can, like we have our show notes in Google, you'll be able to do it seamlessly on Android and on the desktop with OpenOffice.
OpenOffice or LibreOffice?
Pardon me, LibreOffice.
Okay, I thought so. Okay, well, my last one is a bit of a negative one, really, and that is there won't be an i3, i5, or i7 laptop that runs totally free software this year. And I'm thinking about Purism's Librem range. I'm looking squarely at them. As I said before, we might well see, and I'd like to see an ARM-based one, but, well, I'd love to see an x86-based one that's really high-end and runs really well, but that is just not going to happen, despite Purism's promises, and despite a lot of people wanting to do that. This is the safest prediction that has ever been made, apart from my one on Mintcast that I wasn't actually on the show, but I wrote in to say it would be a solid release. But this is even safer than that, I think.
I fear that you're going to get really picky about how open is. Is there something in your mind which is currently a barrier that they're not able to get over that you predict will still be a barrier?
Yeah, a totally free BIOS.
I thought that might be it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be plenty of machines that will work perfectly with free software apart from the proprietary BIOS, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about freeing the BIOS and making it 100% Libre free software.
Okay, so I think we're all done for our predictions. Let's see how that goes in 12 months' time.
Yeah, with that, we're coming to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com, find us on Twitter, Google+, or Facebook, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks for joining me, Paddy and Jesse, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy.
Goodbye, everybody.
Ciao.
See you later.